Hail, Jelli again. This is another one of our panels that we were presenting throughout the summer of 2024, as well as in the winter of 2024. This panel is an Akira Toriyama biography that was presented at Colossalcon in Austin, Texas, and again at Anime Weekend Atlanta in December. So I've edited in the Q&A session from Anime Weekend Atlanta, I think. Hopefully I remembered to do that. I felt this was a good time to release this because we are nearing the 1-year anniversary of Akira Toriyama's passing, and this is a revisit of his biography as well as getting into some of the more details that we have since learned about his passing and some of his later life stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoy this retrospective on Toriyama and enjoy the episode. And like I've said before, more of these will be coming in the future as we do more panels. Thanks.
It's over 9,000!
Welcome, Super Elite Warriors, to a special live version of Final Forum, a podcast for the discussion of all things Dragon Ball. I am your host, Jelli, an elite recruiting member of the Frieza Force on a mission to find the best warriors from across the galaxy to join the greatest army of all time. And I am not joined today by my usual co-host. He is off on a mission that is definitely real, definitely important, and not at all related to him living on the opposite side of the country. So if you're a longtime listener of this show, you might be surprised to see a human man sitting here when I've long purported myself to be a gelatinous being from beyond the farthest reaches of your galaxy. Rest assured, I'm not actually here. I'm merely a projection meant to calm your puny human minds. And now I'm going to bring you a little bit into the world of Final Form and a little bit into what we're here to talk about today. And I put together a panel on Dragon Ball and Akira Toriyama. So we're going to talk a little bit about why we're here, what I'm doing here, why I'm sitting up in front of here talking to everyone, talk about who Toriyama was and his early life, his rise to fame, his later career, and then his legacy, because as we all know, he unfortunately passed away earlier this year. So what are we doing here? Well, at Final Forum, which is our podcast, we're just a couple of lifelong fans who wanted to take our fandom up to the next level. We have been fans forever. I've also been actually a kaiju fan my entire life. And over the years and decades that I've actually been a Godzilla fan, I've made friends both within the actual industry, kind of tangential to the industry, and I've learned so much about the filmmakers, the movies themselves, the messages behind them, and I wanted the same thing for my Dragon Ball fandom. I wanted to understand why the show turned out the way it did and what went behind the show. So to that end, we started a podcast because I wanted to share all the things that I've learned along the way with other people and also keep myself on task. And to that end, we use the Dragon Ball Culture series of books by Dragon Ball scholar Derek Padula. Derek is the foremost North American scholar on Dragon Ball. He has written a series of books that delve into the Japanese and Eastern culture behind Dragon Ball, what it is. He's got actually one of his books has probably the most in-depth English biography of Akira Toriyama you will ever be able to read. And so we lean pretty heavily on his books as sort of a jumping point because really talking about like who Toriyama was in terms of, you can go to his Wikipedia page and look up his career. It's not that hard a thing to do. But if you want to talk about who he really was and figure out why his works turned out the way they did, you have to kind of dig a little bit deeper. And so we went to these books, we went to Kanzenshu, I went to like every interview I could find to try and figure out more about who Toriyama really was. And so with that, who was Akira Toriyama? Talk about a loaded question. To put it simply, though, Akira Toriyama is the reason we're all here today. The reason I'm up here talking, the reason you're out there listening, and very likely the reason any of us chose to attend this convention at all. I know I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him and his work, and I don't think it's much of a stress to say that without his influences, cons like these really wouldn't exist, especially Dragon Ball. It widened the appeal of anime and manga internationally far beyond what anyone could have ever dreamed. Toriyama, as we'll talk in a moment, was already a worldwide, or not worldwide, it was already a national sensation in Japan before Dragon Ball came out, but that didn't translate to worldwide success. Anime didn't become really a worldwide word that people knew until Dragon Ball. So Funimation, recently absorbed by Crunchyroll and its mega monopolistic conglomerate parent company, Sony, they wouldn't have grown to the size they were without Dragon Ball. Names like Chris Sabat, Sean Schemmel would be associated with, like, I don't know, accounting or like insurance sales or something, rather than voice acting. So Toriyama's impact on pop culture just cannot be overstated. But who was he? To start with, Akira Toriyama was born in 1955 in Nagoya, but he grew up in a quiet country town called Kyosu, where he lived for the duration of his life. Just for some context there, Nagoya has a population of over 10 million people in its metropolitan area. Kyosu, where he lived, 70,000. Very early in life, he saw Astro Boy, and he became obsessed with drawing. He would copy draw manga as a 5-year-old child, and when he saw 101 Dalmatians in theaters, it was a watershed moment for him. He drew scenes from it from memory, submitting one drawing, actually, from the movie to a local art contest, which he actually won. He would draw portraits of friends and constantly challenged himself to draw things just from memory over and over and over until he was confident that as long as he wanted to draw something, there was nothing he couldn't draw. Up here, too, you got a picture of, on the far left, the high school that he attended as a child, and a picture of him in high school. Akira Toriyama grew up, in terms of his early influences, on what is known as the Showa-era of entertainment in Japan. Eras of Japanese entertainment are roughly divided based on the current emperor at the time, and they kind of actually reflect the sensibilities of those times. So the Showa-era entertainment tends to be more silly, more fun, more targeted towards kids, being understood by many, many people. It's typically a little more episodic in nature, which I know Dragon Ball kind of isn't, but while promoting Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods in 2013, Toriyama stated that stories had just gotten far too serious and he wanted people to lighten up and have fun again. And that's because he grew up on Japanese TV in the 60s, falling in love at first sight with the likes of Astro Boy, as I mentioned already, Iron Man number 28, which is over there on the far left picture, Ultraman, and Osamatsu-kun. Parenthetically, Osamatsu-kun is where the infamous Shie dance was created, which became a craze in Japan in the 60s, even entering the Godzilla franchise with 1966's invasion of Astro Monster, aka Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, a moment so notorious in Godzilla fandom, it actually caused the original series director Ishiro Honda to walk away from the franchise. He hated it. The anime in particular that Toriyama enjoyed were all based on manga. So from a very young age, he equated having a successful anime with having a successful manga. And that's just where the bug in his brain that I should be a mangaka. Though he loved TV, Toriyama spent a great deal of time watching movies. TV's surge in popularity was during Toriyama's preteen years, so he went to the movies regularly as a child, which was a major influence on his style. In an interview for American Shonen Jump, Toriyama said, "I always play the stories out as movie scenes in my head and imagine how they would unfold." That gives his art, especially at the time when he was writing it, a very unique style. He's drawing it like he would think of it being like a story panel or a panel for a movie. Notoriously, he would actually leave the TV on watching movies while he worked. In that same Shonen Jump interview, he said, quote, "I love sci-fi movies, especially Alien. That's my favorite. I incorporated science fiction into Dragon Ball to expand its scope." So we can see that while he preferred the lighthearted stuff because that's what he grew up on, he was also influenced by and liked more serious stuff when appropriate and done well. And this mix plays into Dragon Ball, and it's a huge part of its appeal. The idea of bringing in sci-fi elements into the Z portion of the story, that's a huge thing, and that's what made it's so popular. Toriyama also really enjoyed World War II period films, taking special interest in the aesthetics and the uniforms and the technology. This played into him being a huge fan of model building. He compulsively bought models, even if he never got around to building them because he was afraid they'd go out of production. He liked to build a model so he could turn it over in his hands 360 and get a complete feel for how the thing was put together. If you really like his mecha or have ever heard people talk about how his mecha are really, really good, this is why. He really understood how things fit together. And actually down here, there's a picture from Sandland. If you've ever read Sandland or you've watched the anime for Sandland recently, the tank is almost like a character unto itself in Sandland, and it is so well put together. It looks like exactly the same tank no matter what angle you're viewing it from. It's really, really excellent work. Of course, you can see the influence on Alien on one of Frieza's designs here. Probably obviously, Toriyama was a big fan of kung fu movies, especially Bruce Lee and specifically Enter the Dragon. In a 2003 interview, he said, "I remember I got so hyped up on it that I went to the movie theater for about 10 days straight." And of course, no fan of kung fu movies would be a fan if they didn't also love Jackie Chan. Quote from Toriyama again, quote, "There was a huge boom in kung fu movies around that time. I saw Jackie Chan in Drunken Master and got hooked. Altogether, I must have watched that movie over 200 times. So those are both awesome movies if you've never seen them for some reason, by the way. He's also a big fan of the Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest, and you can actually see here the influence of the Golden Harvest logo off on the left on the Tenkaichi Budokai logo over on the, I misspoke, the right versus the left, but you could see the two logos, and that's where that comes from. Is the anime staff would often pick up on the things that he loved, and they would incorporate those things into the anime. Toriyama was so into movies and TV that as he aged into adolescence, he essentially stopped reading manga at all. He was president of the manga club at his school, but he didn't read any manga, and though he would still draw, he never finished any manga that he attempted to start as a teen. He was in the manga club because he liked to draw and he liked the idea of it, but he was too scatterbrained, for lack of a better word, to commit to it yet. This pulled through to his later life as well. Despite being a mangaka, he was less influenced by his contemporaries or his predecessors in his actual field than he was by the anime and movie adaptations of those works. This is a big part of what makes Dragon Ball unique, and what, as we'll talk about in a minute, causes Toriyama to struggle to break into the field, actually. He didn't structure his stories like traditional manga. He's already thinking of movies and TV as he wrote, and for a lot of readers at that time, they're reading his stuff, and it's off-putting to them because it doesn't read like all the other manga that they love. I thought this picture was funny. He's a big fan of movies. That actually got him to be an extra in The Return of Godzilla in 1984. And then also, this is a picture of him as a younger guy drawing. He described his hair, or people described his hair as being porcupine-like. And I just think that's an interesting, if you think about his hair being described that way and kind of the way he looks there, an influence on both Goku and Gohan and the way he draws his characters' hairs. Now, was he a hermit? Well, he was an introvert big time. He said, quote, "When I look at it, I don't really like people, and socializing is really awful. Outside of my family, friends, and those connected to my job, I don't actively want to meet anyone." He especially hated big cities and lived, in his own words, in the sticks. He even said that he'd like to move further into the country, and would have if not for his job, because he still occasionally would run into people, and people who recognized him were even worse. He was forced to do interviews for work, and he gave many in his career, but they're short, they're to the point, and he never posed for pictures if he could help it, and he never socialized before or after. And we'll discuss a little bit about why in a couple minutes here. Early in his career, he struggled with workaday jobs at ad agencies. The reason I put a picture of Shape of Water out there is if you've ever seen that movie and Richard Jenkins' character in that movie is drawing like a Jello ad, that's what Toriyama did early in his career. He drew ads for companies. He actually drew, I believe, lingerie ads, which you'd think he would like, but he hated the salaryman style of life. And if you're not sure, if you don't know what a salaryman is, it's the Japanese term for what we might call like a stuffed shirt or a white collar worker. Shows up on time, well dressed, does their job, does everything extra they're asked, wants to climb that corporate ladder, always chasing the next promotion. Toriyama was just miserable in that style of life. He would show up late all the time. He would stay late if asked, but he'd time it so that he could get as much sleep as possible. And one day he compared his pay with someone else who was much younger and less experienced than him, and they got paid more simply because they showed up on time, and he quit. His parents did not approve, but he paid his bills via freelance work, and after puttering around, he picked up a manga, and on the back of it, he saw they were running a contest for submissions with a $5,000 reward. And he decided, hey, I'm going to give it a real shot. So he knuckles down, he bears down, he does his absolute best, and he misses the deadline. Ever the procrastinator, this was one deadline Toriyama just couldn't make. Quick aside here, he's a noted procrastinator. He waited until the last minute to work, often spending 2 to 4 days not sleeping as he scrambled to finish something. This meant he didn't have time to storyboard things out or go through first drafts, and he often wrote himself into corners. This is both where he worked best, under a deadline with his cylinders all needing to fire in order to get something done, and paradoxically, the source of some of the biggest complaints about his storytelling. He's been accused of Deus Ex Machina moments often, but without pushing himself into that corner, he would never have bust out the initial Super Saiyan transformation and other iconic moments from across his work. And Super Saiyan might have looked different if he hadn't procrastinated, because one of the reasons that the hair is blonde is because he didn't have time to color it in. Anyway, he noticed that Shonen Jump was running a similar contest, so he submits to them and loses. He's down on his luck. He's about to miss his self-imposed deadline of, I think it was 2 or 3 years to become a mangaka, and that's when he gets a call. And it's Kazuhiko Torishima, the editor at an editor at Shonen Jump. He tells Toriyama, send him some pages. He liked his style. He wanted to see if he can get him into the publication. Why, though? Toriyama was a contest loser. It turns out each month an editor was in charge of reviewing submissions and reaching out to any potential mangaka they thought they could take under their wing and groom into a publishable artist. Toriyama was lucky that Torishima was reviewing submissions, as Torishima actually was similarly young and similarly didn't read manga at the beginning of his career. In fact, at the beginning of his career, Kazuhiko Torishima looked down on manga and said he would have preferred to be the editor for Playboy, giving the standard reason of the articles, but he really hated it, and he thought being assigned to being a manga editor was like a punishment. Obviously, he came around over the years. He selected Toriyama because Toriyama's style caught his eye. Toriyama submitted some pages to Torishima, and Torishima said, "These are bad, try again." Toriyama tries again. Torishima said, "These are boring. Try again." So Toriyama tries to stop being boring, submits something to him, and ends up making his debut in Weekly Shonen Jump with a one-shot called Wonder Island, about a failed kamikaze pilot who crashes on an island 35 years ago and has been trying to get back home ever since. You can look it up pretty easily via Googling Akira Toriyama Wonder Island. It's not very good. There's problems with the pacing and the structure and the overall storytelling, and even the art lacks like some of the interesting backgrounds that Toriyama could sometimes do, and the paneling also just isn't as good as Toriyama normally is known for. It's very, very amateurish, but the style of it, Toriyama really liked to use kanji and katakana and romaji, or English lettering, in his manga, and that like just caught Torishima's eye, and he's like, this guy has something. There's something in the sauce here. So he gets another chance. Readers, though, they hated Wonder Island. Out of millions of votes for reader feedback cast that leak, his got voted as being, good 14 times. Torishima still believes in him, though. He thought he's unique. He gives him another chance. Wonder Island gets another entry. Readers don't like this one either. But Torishima persevered with his young potential mangaka and gives him another shot. Today's Highlight Island, which is over here on the left, it's better received, though still not great, but it shows Toriyama is improving. So Torishima asked Toriyama to give him a manga with a cute girl protagonist to appeal to the young boys. He created Tomato Girl Detective, which you can see over on the right here, about a young, attractive girl who becomes a detective and stumbles her way to catching the bad guy. This one's pretty well received and actually somewhat of a hit. Toriyama's considered a rising star at this point, so Torishima pushed him again, another manga with a female protagonist. Now, Toriyama did not like drawing girls in the front and center of his work because he thought his readers wouldn't identify with them as much as they should, as they would a boy protagonist, because he's writing for shonen, which is young boys. But Torishima makes him a deal. He says, write a couple chapters of a manga with a girl as the protagonist, and if it's not a hit, I'll never ask you to put a girl at the center of your manga ever, ever again. And in fact, I'll make you a bet. You publish those first couple chapters, I bet they will be extremely popular. If they're not, yeah, you're done. The manga Toriyama created was Dr. Slump. Dr. Slump was a runaway success, so much so that even in its first chapter, things Toriyama intended to be one-time gags are so well received that he felt beholden to them forever. He hated drawing glasses, but he received so much fan mail praising him for putting a character with glasses at the center of his story, and it made those people feel better about their own glasses, that he kept it in. He just wanted it to be a one-time joke that a robot needs glasses, but everyone loved it, and Arare's glasses were here to stay. Dr. Slump itself is probably a discussion for like another time, but it's important to note that it was successful enough that Toriyama could have quit drawing manga altogether forever upon its conclusion and never had to worry about money again. And it was the product of Toriyama and Torishima having a push-pull in their relationship. Torishima wanted a robot in the story. Toriyama writes it to be giant-sized. Torishima tells him to get real. Toriyama draws a standard, normal, boring robot just to piss him off. Torishima says, try again. Stop being boring. So Toriyama, thinking it'll appease Torishima and stop his nagging, makes the robot a cute young girl. Torishima approves. They had this respectful but contentious relationship, with Toriyama always trying to push the envelope, Torishima pushing back, and then having to pull this stubborn artist in directions he was uncomfortable going. Toriyama gets his own payback, though. He sent in the manuscript for his chapter that introduces the main antagonist of Dr. Slump so close to the deadline that Torishima had no time to make any changes at all. And the villain is a caricature of Torishima. And you could see there's a picture of Toriyama and Torishima, and then a young Torishima on the left there, and then a picture of the main antagonist of Dr. Slump, whose name is Masharito. What Toriyama did with that is he flipped the syllables for the name. Masharito is Torishima backwards. Torishima, much like Toriyama with the glasses, hoped the character would be a one-time gag, but he winds up being extremely popular, and he becomes the main antagonist of Dr. Slump. Torishima forever becomes immortalized as a villain. Ultimately, however, each one says that their work would not be successful without these conflicts and these disagreements. Their bickering is what led to their success. When merchandising and money kick in, as I mentioned, Dr. Slump is hugely popular. Toriyama basically didn't care. His hands were full with writing, so he let Torishima just handle it. He was often sent samples and such for approvals for merchandise and things, but he said looking at it just stack up unused made him uncomfortable, and he's flush with cash. He doesn't like to fuss over things, so he buys another house and stores all his stuff there where it's just out of sight. An unofficial fan club starts in the wake of his success, and Toriyama is so flattered with it that he starts sending them letters, sketches, unpublished stories. The club grows so large it becomes his official fan club, and that's where Birdland Press came out. I think there's something like 28 or 30 of these. I can't remember the number anymore. Birdland Press, it's got a bunch of like letters and notes and things from Toriyama in it. It's some of the only kind of stuff of his that hasn't really been published elsewhere to date, really. He's so renowned now and so established that he and author Akira Sakuma collaborate on and write a 12-chapter, relatively short manga called Akira Toriyama's Crummy Manga Lab, about how to draw and write in the Toriyama style. These become something of a Bible to aspiring young mangaka, and few mangaka in the years to come say they're unfamiliar with it. It's also in this short manga that Toriyama creates the robot personification of himself, which he often used as a character to introduce things, or in his letters section of his tankobon, which tankobon are just your trade paperbacks. When you see this little robot, which looks like he's wearing a gas mask and he's got little clamp hands, it's supposed to be Toriyama talking to you. This thing pops up in the background of his works at times, too. It's officially called Robo Toriyama, but the name was only ever used once, and most fans, by the time the name was used, had already taken to calling it the Toribot, And so that name is stuck more than anything else. But Toriyama still said he was glad he came up with this character early in his career so he could spend more time not being recognized by people in public. So now he's super successful. He's got tons of money, but he's really introverted, but he is looking for love. He bumps into a family friend in town, and she invites him out on the town. He really didn't want to go, but she says, listen, there's going to be other people there. They're all mangaka, so they're not going to be, like, bugging you for questions. They're not going to be pumping you for information. They're all successful mangaka as well. And also, I've got some girlfriends you might like to meet. So he sucks it up and goes. He meets Nachi Mikami, a fellow mangaka, and becomes smitten. He said, quote, I admired her for her adult personality and her attention to people's needs. I like efficient people. I'm pretty impatient, so I can't stand people who putter around. Efficient, sexy women are great. So she's no nonsense and doesn't play games, and he's into that. He also likes girls with short hair, and Nachi Mikami has that, as you can see in the picture over on the right. They plan to get married in a quiet ceremony at Toriyama's home in 1982. Unfortunately, a list of Japan's top money-earning people of 1981 is published the day before the wedding. Toriyama is listed as number 1 in the other category, which is like a catch-all for anyone who's not a CEO, politician, major tech innovator, athletes, people you might expect to be making a lot of money. He's number 1 of, like, basically people you wouldn't expect to be making a lot of money. He's number 1. The media flocks to his house with questions about how he became so popular and how he made so much money on his wedding day. That's why there's actual pictures of Toriyama's wedding day. If you Google Akira Toriyama wedding, there's pictures of his wedding day. He's so flustered by this, he vows never to show his face in public again. The extent to which he was successful is staggering when you think about a man who's often called the most important mangaka of his generation and is routinely ranked number 3 all time behind the creators of Astro Boy and Doraemon. It's insane. He appeared on television in a television interview during which he was noticeably uncomfortable in 1983, so the next year. Nobody really knows why. But that experience combined with the wedding thing must have made him uncomfortable enough that he doubles down on this idea of never showing his face again hard. His next televised interview is in 2013. It's a minute long, and he refuses to allow them to show his face on television. His last public appearance was in 2002 at, I think, a launch party for Shonen Jump's USA publication branch. An American Vegeta voice actor Chris Sabat noted Toriyama seemed super uncomfortable and left without socializing at all afterwards. His last public pictures were taken in 2017, and those are like the extent of all his public appearances after 1982. All the rest of his interviews that he gives over the next 40-some years are in text and correspondence form and audio form. He refuses to ever appear in public. It's in the mid-'80s. Toriyama is at the end of material for Dr. Slump. He wants time off. He's asking for 5 months, but Kazuhiko Torishima tells him, I want a new idea. You're not just taking a vacation. And in fact, you don't have 5 months. You have 3 months, and you better bring me a new idea in that time. Torishima didn't want Toriyama just twiddling his thumbs because he knows the guy's personality. He knows he's going to just sit around and do nothing if he's allowed. He does, however, take a 2-week vacation to China with his wife during this time, and Torishima tags along. Not much is known about the trip except that they take it, but also that Toriyama's wife takes a lot of pictures, and these pictures wind up serving as material for Toriyama to study so he could draw backgrounds and architecture in his new manga, which he kind of thought might be based in China. After this trip, Toriyama and Torishima spoke on the phone daily to come up with an idea. So he gets 2 weeks off, and then for the next 2.5 months, daily phone calls with his boss. They just can't figure out something that they both think is a good enough idea to replace Dr. Slump. Torishima then travels to Toriyama's house so they can brainstorm face-to-face. They still can't think of anything. Torishima's about to head home empty-handed with nothing to give his bosses to replace the most successful manga that they have, Dr. Slump. When Toriyama's wife comes in and she brings them some tea, and as she does, she makes a little offhand comment about how Toriyama's an atypical mangaka. Torishima's like, What do you mean by that? And she's like, well, remember, she's a mangaka before she got married, so when she got married, she stopped being. They had a more traditional marriage in that respect. She didn't work once they got married. But she says most manga listen to some music to get into a rhythm while they write. This guy watches movies. And Toriyama is flabbergasted. He's like, how can you do something as visual as writing a manga and drawing a manga if you're watching a movie? Aren't those two things like mutually exclusive? You can't pay attention to what you're writing if you're looking elsewhere. Toriyama explains it's a movie he's seen 50 to 100 times. He just listens to the background dialogue and noise and looks up when it's time for the good parts. We can pretty safely assume that movie is Drunken Master, which he, at least in this specific scenario, because we know he's seen it or claims to have seen it hundreds of times, and we know there's a lot of Jackie Chan influences in Dragon Ball. And Toriyama even once said if he ever could pick someone to play Goku, it would be a young Jackie Chan. Toriyama says, that's it. That's the idea. And Toriyama's like, what are you talking about? And he's like, make something inspired by this movie that you love so much it's imprinted on your brain. Unfortunately, Toriyama is not confident in his skills in this respect. He says, quote, the things I like and the things that I can draw in manga are different, so I don't want to. But Toriyama, again, knowing how and when and where to push this guy, sets a schedule. He tells Toriyama to get it done, have it on his desk by such and such a date, and then just leaves with no further discussion. Toriyama later admits that he cussed Toriyama out over this, but also that it obviously worked. Toriyama takes to writing a couple of yomikuri, or one-shots, as part of his responsibilities to his publisher, and he decides to make them prototypes for his new serialized manga. One such obvious one-shot is called Dragon Boy. This sounds like a super, super obvious Dragon Ball prototype, but it's just a 2-chapter manga meant to be a test for a general kung fu manga. It's not the first draft of Dragon Ball or anything like that. Toriyama's still testing out his ideas. He hasn't landed on specifics yet, but there are a lot of similarities. The main character, named Tonton, whose name literally translates to China Boy, lives in hermit country and is tutored by a martial arts elder master. He's got superhuman strength. He's tasked with escorting a young woman out of a country, and it's basically China. And to aid in this quest, the elder master gives Tong Tong a magical dragon jewel that can be called upon for assistance when trouble arrives. Though it's not wishes, as we know from Dragon Ball. Instead, it's little dragons that pop out of these orbs that are supposed to assist Tonton when he gets into trouble. The only time it happens in the manga, it just like pops out and it's like, hi, and then it just runs away and does nothing. That's a great Toriyama type of joke. Dragon Boy was actually pretty well received, and so Toriyama and Torishima know that if they went down this route, this martial arts route, they've got kind of a built-in audience and a soft test audience that's ready for kung fu manga. Toriyama also writes Tongpo's Great Adventure, or The Adventure of Tongpo, during this time, about a young boy named Tongpo who travels through space, lands on a strange planet, and meets a human girl named Puramo or Plamo. This has a lot of science fiction elements that would appear in Dragon Ball. Tongpo uses capsules to summon bikes and houses from thin air. The girl uses guns, and like they are shooting at each other with guns, and she uses her feminine beauty as her weapons. So if you're interested in Dragon Boy and Tongpo, Viz Media has a collection of Akira Toriyama's earliest works published under the title Akira Toriyama's Manga Theater. It's like $20. It's as thick as maybe like the thickest 3-in-1 of like the Viz Bigs of Dragon Ball that you'll see. I'd highly recommend it. Yes, it's got some of his really, really bad stuff in it, like Wonder Island, but it's got some of his great, great one-shots in it. And you can see his growth as a mangaka throughout reading it. It's awesome. It's after both of these that Toriyama starts working somewhat in earnest on coming up with Dragon Ball proper, and it takes him basically just 2 days to write the first chapter, but he did have some drafting along the way, at least in terms of the character creation. As you can see here, Goku was actually originally drawn in like his first draft as a monkey boy, but then Toriyama didn't like that. He hated drawing tails, he hated drawing fur, and he just wanted his protagonist to be nondescript and like an everyman. And so he draws Goku kind of looking a lot like Gohan, and Torishima is like, that's boring, I don't like it, change it. He makes him change the hair, and he makes him add the tail. Toriyama took every opportunity he could to not draw that tail, though he constantly has it getting ripped off because he hated drawing it. Dragon Ball is first published in Weekly Shonen Jump on November 20th, 1984. It would be easy shorthand to just say it becomes this smash success, but that wasn't how it started. The first 23 chapters, which cover what we think of as the Pilaf arc, are decently received, but not as well as Dr. Slump. Everyone's expecting this thing from Toriyama to be the next big thing, and they want it to be an even bigger hit, but it's not pulling in the numbers. He and Torishima do some brainstorming, and Toriyama tries to actually back out. He's like, that's it, I'm done. I wrote the story, I'm done. It's not as popular as Dr. Slump. Let me rest, please. And Torishima is like, nope. You can't take the easy way out. And so he goes and Torishima looks at other popular manga at the time, specifically Fist of the North Star. And he decides that to make Dragon Ball more popular, they need to focus on fewer characters, more battles, be more hip and cool and with the times and what kids in the 80s like, and break some of the conventions they'd established. Don't just all make it always a quest for these Dragon Balls. People will figure out that formula and they'll get bored. And so they come up. Toriyama reluctantly says, okay, I'll try again. They shift a little bit from a gag manga. There's plenty of gags still in these early tournament arcs, but they shift to being a battle manga. They focus on fewer characters and they incorporate more fighting. The 21st Tenkaichi Budokai, you can actually see there, Toriyama takes a trip to Bali right around this time, and you can see he takes this picture over on the left, and if you can kind of see it behind Goku on the right, those are the gates to the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai. It's a real place. This arc launches Dragon Ball's popularity to new heights, and it never looks back. In the lead up to the ending of the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai, though, we learn how Toriyama loves to be a contrarian, and he loves to subvert people's subvert people's expectations. He actually intended, in the one time of his career he planned something out, he intended Goku to win the 21st Tenkaichi Budokai. But when he catches wind from readership polls and friends who say, well, obviously Goku's going to win, he changes his mind at the last minute just to not do what people are expecting him to do. As the manga goes on, anytime he receives a complaint from a reader, it usually gets paired with 50 other praises. And so he says, that person who complained, I'm going to really piss them off and do what they hated even more. So when people start complaining that his arc is getting too angular, but other people are loving it, he's like, I'm going to make it more angular. When people complain that Vegeta has never won against a main villain, Toriyama's like, guess what? I'm going to pretend to let him and then not have it happen. He's doing this because he's trying to piss people off. I think maybe because he's trying to not ever work again. But the popularity only ever continues to grow. During Dragon Ball's run, Toriyama still had other obligations to publishers and editors, and he winds up contributing to a lot of other projects. He wrote several one-shot manga, most often for a contest in Shueisha or Weekly Shonen Jump, where their pool of mangaka would all submit stories, and Shueisha readers would then pick their favorite from all the stories that all of their mangaka submitted, and they would win a prize. And I think it's Pink the Rain Jack is a Toriyama one-shot. It actually won a prize. He got a trip to China or India or something for that, for winning that. During this time, he also wrote Cashman and Go-Go Akmen, which were longer manga. They had multiple chapters, and they were also adapted into anime as well. He also provided the character art for Dragon Quest and Chrono Trigger. The slime from Dragon Quest is Akira Toriyama. For a lot of people, Dragon Quest and or Chrono Trigger are actually their first experience to Akira Toriyama. My co-host first discovered Toriyama through Chrono Trigger. As Dragon Ball winds down, though, Toriyama wants to just be done. He does publish a few longer manga after Dragon Ball ended, as we see here. There's Koa and Sandland are two of his that later in life he actually said were his favorites. But upon Sandland's completion in 2000, he basically considered himself retired. And much like his commitment to being a hermit, his success up to a certain point was actually kind of impressive when you think about it. Nekomajin is the only multi-chapter work he published after from 2000 to 2013. And in that 13-year stretch, he writes fewer than 30 total manga chapters. He's still doing some work, but he's as active as Stephen King is these days, where he gets an idea, he'll write it, he'll throw it out there, but mostly he's not considering himself working day to day. For all intents and purposes, he's retired, and then something happens in 2008. Obviously, Toriyama's response actually was not immediate. He didn't get back into working regularly again until about 2013. But in the lead up to Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods in 2013, he was quoted as saying, quote, "Also, at the time of the Hollywood movie, the live-action Dragon Ball, the script had too little grasp on the world and its characters, and on top of that, it had conventional content that I couldn't find interesting. So I cautioned them and suggested changes, but in spite of that, they seemed to have a strange confidence and didn't really listen to me. What came out in the end was a movie I can't really call Dragon Ball." For a Japanese person, and one often is not as outspoken as Toriyama, that quote is as close as you can get to outright seething hatred. With very, very few exceptions for people in Japan. Obviously, notably, one of my favorite is actually a Godzilla director, Jun Fukuda. He would say his own movies were garbage. When people would pressure him to say, which one do you like best? He'd be like, none of them. They're all terrible. And he actually said publicly he wished there had never been any Godzilla sequels. He's an awesome, cantankerous man. Dragon Ball Evolution may have been a steaming pile, but its ultimate impact on the franchise is that it put the bug in Toriyama's brain that made him want to come back and restart the franchise with Jocko the Galactic Patrolman, if you don't know, is actually kind of a backdoor Dragon Ball story. At the very end, it's revealed that it's happening in the Dragon Ball universe. And then also, they tell Toriyama in like 2011 or 12 that they're going to be making a new Dragon Ball animated movie, and he like reads the script and he's like, I'm not letting Evolution happen again, and he like took over that movie. Though Toriyama had a drive to tell new Dragon Ball stories, he had far less of a desire than ever to actually work on a regularly serialized manga. Thus, Shueisha introduced him to their newly acquired mangaka, Toyotaru. There's never been any official confirmation on this, but Toyotaru is widely believed, and it's like all but official, to be the person who wrote the fan manga Dragon Ball AF under the pseudonym Toyble. He's basically handpicked by Toriyama and Shueisha to be the new mangaka for Dragon Ball and the successor to Toriyama. Unfortunately, the exact nature of their working relationship is complicated, and we could probably do an entire panel on that. But Toriyama was more active and involved in his last few years than he had been for more than a decade prior to Battle of Gods. Not only working on Dragon Ball Super's manga, but also being rather involved in the newer movies. He was actually super involved in all of the newest movies that came out in theaters. That's where he spent more of his energy and efforts. A little bit less on the manga. He would come up with story ideas, and then Toyotaru would submit panels to him and be like, how's this look? How's this look? And he'd be like, yeah, it's fine. I don't care. Or he would suggest little changes. He was also super involved in the forthcoming Sandland, or not the forthcoming, but the Sandland anime adaptation, which if you haven't watched, it's really good. It's on Hulu in America, or if you got a VPN and want to put yourself outside of America, it's on Disney+. And he's also worked heavily on the forthcoming Dragon Ball Daima. This is another one where he saw the script for it, saw the idea, he liked it, and he was like, I like it enough that I care about it, and he took it over. This is going to be basically the last thing you'll see that Toriyama had a very active hand in creating. Earlier this year, as I'm sure everyone knows, we sadly lost Akira Toriyama rather suddenly on March 1st after an acute subdural hematoma. In the immediate aftermath of his passing, there's a bunch of speculation about what exactly happened, and even I thought, after like very briefly reading up on acute subdural hematoma, reading that it's like a burst brain clot in your brain that usually comes from impact trauma, I kind of thought, hey, he liked to drive his motorcycle. He lived out in the sticks. What if he got in a crash and just couldn't get to a hospital in time? We've since learned that he was in fact ill in the time leading up to his passing. He confided in friends that he was going to have brain surgery to remove a tumor in February of this year. And it's likely that ultimately complications from the surgery and or continued tumor growth led to his passing. I think we can all remember where we were when we found out that happened and our initial feelings on it. I thought it was a joke because I saw it on like one of those like social media posts that look like jokes. But in terms of things that he like, I just think this is crazy. The very last thing Toriyama ever did before he passed was a Dragon Ball Super panel revision. Toyotaru sends him the last final chapter of Dragon Ball Super, which is the what are they calling it? The superhero arc. So if you haven't read it, it's the manga adaptation of the superhero movie, and it ends with the team all flying away from a teacher. And Toriyama, these are not the actual pages because they couldn't release them due to like Shueisha copyright reasons. But Toriyama tells Toyotaru, hey, have Piccolo turn around and wave goodbye to his teacher before leaving. That's pretty awesome. So Toriyama's legacy, it's so vast and so influential. It smacks of hubris to attempt to boil it down to a single slide as part of an hour-long panel about the man, but I did the best I could. On his passing, Masako Nozawa, the voice of Goku, said, "My mind is so empty right now, I hate to believe it, and I don't want to even think about it. Even in this situation, though, I can keep my emotions under control knowing that I will stay by Goku until the very end of my life. It's all thanks to what Toriyama-sensei told me every time we met. Please take good care of Goku." Longtime editor Kazuhiko Torishima said, "Toriyama-san, you were the greatest manga artist." His protege, Toyotaru, said, "I drew manga because I wanted to be praised by Toriyama-sensei. It was my everything." One Piece creator Eiichiro Oda was crushed as they had become friends over the years, and credits Toriyama alone for taking manga mainstream and for him deciding to become a mangaka. Masashi Kishimoto and Tite Kubo, creators of Naruto and Bleach, respectively, also credit Toriyama for their success, with Kubo even saying that a letter of encouragement from Toriyama is the sole reason Bleach was published, and Kishimoto calling him the god of manga. The influences of Toriyama and Dragon Ball are everywhere, and when you see Noah Lyles throwing a Kamehameha after winning the 100-meter dash at the Olympics, or the Italian rowing team striking Ginyu Force poses, it's hard to argue that anyone else has had a bigger hand in making manga and anime mainstream. It's still weird to talk about him in the past sense, but his legacy absolutely lives on. And I mean, there's a bunch of people in this room right now, which is great. Thanks for coming to this, by the way. You have options when you come to a con, and you all decided to come to this one. You made the right choice, but... If this all felt a little too brief and you wanted to get something else out of it, by all means, check out our podcast. We've talked about Toriyama in depth multiple times. We use a lot of our discussions about him and his personality to color our read on the manga material as well. I have some time, so if anyone has some questions... I had someone ask me at a panel one time what my favorite attack that was non-canon was, and I was like, is there such a thing? And they were like, what about the Dragon Fist? And I was like, oh, okay, that one, because I literally don't know any others. I'm sorry. My opinion on GT is good ideas done poorly. I don't think GT is a waste. I don't think it's a pile. I think if you like GT, there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's some great stuff in it, but there's a lot of good ideas that just aren't done to their full potential. All right, before I get out of here, let me just mention, come up, you could come see me, grab a business card, subscribe to the podcast, QR code here. If you want to do that right now, grab the QR code, subscribe, give us a 5-star rating. I've got t-shirts I can give you. Just show me on your phone, where you've done that, and I'll give you a t-shirt. And also, I always like to end our show on a Dragon Ball note. So, what will the future of the Dragon Ball franchise be? Will Daima live up to expectations? Find out next time and help us achieve our final forum. Thank you.
Final Form is written and produced by Tom Gwelly. It is performed by Dan Kinney and Tom Gwelly. Our webmaster is Dan Kinney. Our theme music is provided by YouTube content creator GVG Kid. Want to learn more about the Dragon Ball universe, including concept art, behind-the-scenes interviews, and recommendations from Jelli and Bikini? Connect with us on social media. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Final Forum Pod. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you receive your podcasts. And of course, make sure to share it with your friends and family and help us spread the word of the glory of Lord Frieza. The Frieza Force thanks you for your listenership.